This is going to be a talk about biodiversity, about evolution, about how we live together with other species on this planet. And I'm not really a biologist or a zoologist. I study philosophy, so my perspective on all this is more like overarching, more general, and I specialize in ethics and animal protection ethics, about basically relationships between humans and other animals. So also in that sense, this story will be much more about animals than about plants. That's my name, Sandris Ādminis. Sabina is my sister, and we are here as a part of a vacation trip that we also decided to combine with something more practical and useful, sharing some knowledge, some encouragement, inspiration to others, basically about things that we are doing already in our countries. And about myself, in short, I've been active in animal protection, in humane education for the past 10 years. After I finished my philosophy studies in University of Latvia, I've been writing essays about these topics, about what's happening in animal protection in Latvia. I've been going to schools with lectures about biology, about ethics and animal behavior and other topics. I've been doing a radio show together with some colleagues, also about the same issues. And I've even had this wonderful opportunity to participate in the local TEDx conference. So you can still see my video online, my speech about pigs and other animals. But in general, one of the first things that I remember related to my interest with other creatures on the planet was something like this. It's not my photo, it's not what I've been involved, but yeah, in one of the first school years, I remember collecting all kinds of bugs and insects, and pinning them down with needles in this wafer box or something. So it looked something similar to this, but yeah, not with so crazy big creatures. But yeah, so I killed many of them. Some of them I found already dead. I'm not proud of it, but yeah, that's one of my first memories about like more natural scientific interest in those creatures. But if we turn the pages of history much more back, then this is Aristotle, the famous philosopher and one of the forefathers of natural science. He described nature, he described all kinds of creatures, plants and animals, and basically he said that there exists a strict hierarchy in the natural world. On the bottom there are inanimate objects like stones, and then in the next stage, next level, there are plants, all kinds of trees, and then there are mammals and fishes and also birds, and humans are on top of it all. And of course, in his view, in his time, 2,600 years ago, he clearly also defined the purpose of those parts of the natural world, that the plants are made by gods for all the animals, and also the animals and the plants are made for the humans. But actually it was even more detailed. For instance, he also believed that women and slaves are below male humans, so like between the animals and humans. And in general, this kind of classical hierarchy of beings also includes like the highest beings, like gods and angels, which are above human. So that has been dominating this view for many centuries. But coming back to the bugs that you saw in the beginning, I included them because one of the main inspirations for me about natural science and all the creatures is this person, Charles Darwin, and 150 years ago and even more, he made a lot of research in all over the world, especially in Southern America and many other places. And he was fascinated by beetles, as many of his contemporaries, especially when he was younger. They were collecting all kinds of rare beetles, and there were all kinds of funny stories that, for example, he was picking up a tree bark and found there 3 rare beetles, and some of them he managed to catch by hand, and then there was another one like super rare, and since his hands were already taken, he dropped one of the beetles in his mouth, as they do sometimes when collecting birds' eggs, which was also a thing in the 19th century, collecting all kinds of colorful eggs. But of course, it's different with the beetle, and he got some kind of not a poisonous, but irritating substance from the beetle in his mouth, and so he spit it out. And he's writing about all kinds of weird and funny occasions while observing all the animals. But why I came to him, because in contrast to what Aristotle, another bearded man, wrote about, in some sense, what Darwin did was establishing a much broader, more complex, and more evidence and science-based understanding of the interconnections between various life forms. And here, I don't remember where this quote was from. He says, so the affinities of all the beings of the same class have sometimes been represented by a great tree. As buds give rise to growth, to fresh buds, and these, if vigorous, branch out and overtop on all sides, many a feebler branch. So by generation, I believe it has been with the great tree of life, which fills with its dead and broken branches the crust of the earth, and covers the surface with its ever-branching and beautiful ramifications. So basically, talking about life forms as a huge tree, whereas the extinct species have become like the dry branches and the dry leaves that fall on the ground, and still that the tree is growing on all sides, not just upwards, vertically, but also on the sides. And in some sense, around that time also developed the interpretation of the tree of life. And this comes from a book called The Evolution of Man, and this is like a super literal manifestation of this idea of tree of life. And nowadays the scientists and all the biology enthusiasts understand that this is a super simplified understanding of how the species have developed, and you cannot really say that man is like on the top, in the middle, like the pinnacle, some kind of godlike creature, because it's much more complex. One of the contemporary ways to look at biodiversity and how the life developed from the first early super simple life forms is like this. For example, the first life forms developed into 4 branches. Some of them became other simpler life forms, like all kinds of unicellular organisms. Some developed into multicellular organisms, which again branched out into mushrooms and lichen and plants and animals. And then in the animal group there are birds and reptiles and mammals. So it's been branching all the time in all the directions, and basically if we count the number of species, there are many more other species than like, for example, mammals, even though we consider mammals as the symbolical, the main kind of animals. What else Darwin helped us understand is that we are not the first ones. We haven't been the only ones as human beings. Only for the past 30,000 of years we have been the only humans. Before that there were several other species of humans that probably were in the same level developed mentally, cognitively, and also creating probably art and music and tools. We don't know much about them, and we have started to discover it and research it seriously only for the past 100 years. So there's still a lot of knowledge to be gained. This is also like a simplified illustration for children, basically to understand better how the origin of life manifests into diverse forms of life. Like this is the branch of plants, which also has all kinds of sub-branches. There is a branch of mushrooms, and there are the animals up here, the reptiles and dinosaurs with the extinct branches, and the mammals, and so on. But this is probably the more accurate way to show it. And even in this illustration, there are 93,000, almost 94,000 species mentioned. This picture is available like a bigger size online, so you can zoom in and see that, okay, there's Homo sapiens here in this little tiny branch. So it's like a huge map where you can try to understand where the other species have gone, like, I don't know, flamingos or some specific mushrooms. In some sense, it is like a road, and the road is telling about how the species specialized in that direction. So if we call it still the tree of life, and if we consider all the life forms as our distant relatives, then it's a super huge tree. But yeah, if we talk about contemporary world and how it is nowadays, then it's a bit different. I would say that in large sense the connection is lost, even though we are regaining the understanding. We are let's say we are developing it. In contrast to what I showed before, the ladder, which is a super simplified way of understanding life, and then the tree of life. Of course, we are getting much more sophisticated in our understanding, but at the same time, there are many things happening that are basically signals that we are losing the connection, that we are losing the understanding of this diversity. So instead of this, actually we have much more of this, like the diversity of products is like so huge. And I really like this idea that we need much less than we think we need. So these things that we have supported with our money, which has had huge impact on the environment, probably shouldn't be there. And again, another example, instead of the species diversity, we have the opposite thing. This is a infographic from recent research, basically saying that 90%, 96% of all the mammals on the planet are humans, and the animals that the humans have created, the pigs, the cows, the horses and sheep. So only 4% are the wild mammals right now. It's a tiny number, and like there is the whole diversity of the species left in this tiny piece. Of course, those are only mammals, and we can talk about birds, but it's quite the same about the birds. This data comes from the same research, published in the Guardian journal in the beginning of this year, and basically about the birds, it's quite similar. Like 90%, 70% of all the birds on the planet are the human bred birds, mostly chickens, but also ducks and geese. So, like symbolically, we could say that this is what's happening. That these are the typical standard birds on the planet, and we are treating them basically like this, collecting and bringing into the shops, supermarkets for the humans to consume. And yeah, this is where those 90 or 70% of animals are. We don't see them in the nature, right? They're not on some grazing lands usually. We cannot see them on the sides of the roads usually because they are bred and kept in those huge farms. it's not just the food animals, cows, chickens, and pigs, but also fur animals, minks and foxes. They're also kept in super tiny cages, just to breed them as fast as possible with as little cost as possible. Not to give them too much space, because then it becomes difficult to clean it up and so on. So once again, the connection is lost, I would say, and this is one of the signals about it. And when you wake up, when you open your eyes and you see what's happening in those places, it's not something that people would like to see, and of course those animals most likely are also not happy about it. Another how to say, a bit scary fact that recently came out was geologists are starting to talk about that we should create a new name for the common geological era. We should call it the Anthropocene, but basically because the typical thing of this era is that in the geological layers we can find already a lot of remains of human behavior, all kinds of construction materials and of course plastic. But what was super surprising is that according to some new research, the most common thing that will be found in the next centuries by archaeologists and geologists about our era would be chicken bones. This is the New Scientist article from this December, just 2 weeks ago, and those bones are everywhere. So and it, of course it fits perfectly this previous story about what is happening. Another sad story about sixth mass extinction. There are a lot of people who research this, and they say that right now we are going through one of the biggest species extinctions, and what I wrote here, with a widespread degradation of highly biodiverse habitats such as coral reefs and rainforests, as well as other areas. The vast majority of these extinctions are thought to be undocumented, so we haven't yet noticed that they are gone, as no one is even aware of the existence of the species before they go extinct, or no one has yet discovered their extinction. And the current rate of extinction of species is estimated at 100 to 1,000 times higher than natural background rates. So basically the extinction happens all the time, that's normal, but what makes it mass extinction is the fact that the volume, the speed of extinctions is 100 to 1,000 times higher. And it's not just about land animals, but probably even much more about marine species, and of course the so-called bigger megafauna, the big animals are probably the most vulnerable, the elephants and rhinoceroses. This is a little bit unrelated, but also in my opinion still connected with the fact that how we treat animals. There was a suggestion by some German shelters that around Christmas time they shouldn't be giving animals for adoption, because people often take them as gifts and to give to their children or I don't know, neighbors or relatives, and oftentimes it is not a decision that is made well, that is sometimes people don't even ask their relatives or neighbors, like, hey, would you like to have this? And they just think it's gonna be a nice surprise, but as a result, many of those animals get returned back to the shelters. So I would say what is also characterizing our society is that we treat them as like products that can be bought and given back or even rented, and I think it's a bit the wrong direction to go. Another thing, we can see already for thousands of years that people have like to draw animals even on the cave walls and so on, and it really looks like they have respected them highly. It's not that like in all the depictions the animals are, I don't know, with some spears being killed or something. They're sometimes being just depicted in their natural environment. But yeah, what is happening right now, and in many countries, people like to get those animals as close as possible and pay money for it. Of course, it's understandable that we want to see them, we want to have a closer contact with them, because there is something really magnetic with it, to be together with this super intelligent creature which is friendly, just like the dogs, right? But what is happening, as Jacques-Yves Cousteau, the French conservationist and filmmaker, said, no aquarium, no tank in a marine land, however spacious it may be, can begin to duplicate the conditions of the sea, and no dolphin who inhabits one of those aquariums or one of those marine lands can be considered normal. So basically, just like with some zoos, if an animal is kept in a tiny area, oftentimes they develop this so-called stereotypical behavior. They get all kinds of mental disorders. They get depressed because they cannot like run around as they would naturally in the natural environment. So yeah, that's a sad story. What's happening with those animals and with their minds. So probably those who are kept in the marine parks and so on, who are still used for showing tricks to humans, they are either recently there or they're lucky ones who for some reason haven't lost their minds yet and still can obey the training and so on. And yeah, instead of respecting our fellow Earth and all the species, like all kinds of stuff like this is happening. As far as I know, bird hunts, they're totally ecologically unbased. Like there is no ecological reason to do those hunts. Like of course it's a complex issue about like carnivores in the wild, like wolves and so on. Like should we manage those populations or not? And is the shooting the only way to do it? But about birds, it's quite clearly known that we don't need to kill them at all. And all the bird huntings that are happening are just for fun, for meat and tradition or something like that. So I think that should be one of the things that is changing in the near future. Like if we want to really say that we are respecting life and not doing crazy stuff. Yeah, luckily this is just an artwork. It's not a real whale, but probably you have seen a lot of photos as well. For example, recently there was a new photo with a seagull who is bringing food to her baby, and what she is like regurgitating, or what's the expression, are pieces of plastic for the little baby, and they eat all that stuff that gets into the oceans. And so maybe this caricature is quite accurate, as sad as it is. Yeah, basically reminding that we all come from the seas, from the oceans, our long ago ancestors. But what we do to the oceans is crazy. So yeah, in many senses the connection is lost. But what I wanted to include are also the positive things. It's not easy, to be honest, to find like really good optimistic reasons, like to say that yes, it's not so bad and we are not like completely ruining everything, because at least for me those reasons for hope are either small and local, or they're quite general and abstract. For example, the fact that the environmental movement itself has developed only since 70s or 80s. So it's just the past few decades when we have started to think about, wow, it's crazy what we're doing and we cannot continue like this. So that gives me hope that we just started. We are now using all kinds of scientific methods to develop water cleaning systems, like how to get the plastic out of the water, how to create biodegradable plastic and so on. It's just starting right now. So that's one of the biggest hopes for me, that okay, yeah, it's really crazy right now, but we are starting. We might not be too late. And yeah, in general, like 3 basic principles or things that I would say is that there are all kinds of ways to reconnect with the other species, just like we had today, this mindful walk and trying to pay attention to all kinds of life forms. Spending a little bit of time with this plant or that little beetle, looking at it, and especially if we know some kind of background information, it's much easier for us to make the connection. There are also the so-called animal sanctuaries, more and more available. Also in Malta, I know that there are a horse sanctuary, and I guess a chicken sanctuary, also a cat shelter. Those are places where people can go and help those animals. They can get in contact with them. They can also adopt some of those animals to help. Another thing is that, yeah, society, thanks to the internet, thanks to all kinds of informational, how to say, yeah, basically, we can learn so much more. We can share knowledge. We can contact each other and arrange this kind of events. This is giving me hope that we are at least having more and more opportunities to get together and build some projects together. And yeah, lots of positive news to notice if we are really looking for them. Because in some sense, for humans, it's easier to notice the bad things, the bad news. But still, I think there are a lot of good news. So that's why I included some of them in the next slides. Actually, I did a lazy job. I found recently, a few days ago, a super nice list of 50 good things that happened recently that need to have more attention. And I picked those that resonate well with this topic. So one interesting and quite surprising example was about a beer company that is creating the 6-pack rings that hold those jars together that are actually coming from some kind of plants or something. So it works well for the beer cans, but at the same time, if it gets in the water, which shouldn't probably happen anyway, it's not dangerous to the turtles anymore. And I don't know, it's made from seaweed or something. But yeah, that's one way that shows that there could be creative technological solutions that really help the life around us. Another example, France becomes the first country in Europe to ban all 5 pesticides killing bees. So I hope that's the beginning of a wider change. The number of tigers in the wild in Nepal have almost doubled in under a decade. So probably they just invested more money in those repopulation programs. All the time we are finding new ways to make it easier, these breeding programs and so on. And yeah, it's a huge issue also, the zoos themselves, even though there are just a tiny number of animals if you compare it to farming where all this crazy stuff is happening, growing animals for meat and dairy and eggs. But also about zoos, as far as I know, even less than 10% of all the animal species kept in the zoos are endangered or included in the repopulation programs. So most of the species are there just for human entertainment because they look good, because they attract people, because they have stripes and different colors and so on. So yeah, that's a different issue, but related to this. A South Korean court has ruled the killing of dogs for meat is illegal in landmark ruling. So Korea, southern, northern, and also the surrounding areas have been the last ones, as far as I know, where dog meat is still a thing, where dogs are bred for meat. And I believe that if we bring attention to this issue, then it's also easier to talk about other creatures that are killed for being eaten. Giant pandas are no longer endangered in China, and China is going to build a massive 1.5 billion panda conservation park. I'm not sure how much it is related to some tourist attraction or something, probably not at all. And China has a lot of problems and they don't respect the environmental issues, I would say, at all if you compare it to European countries. At least that's my impression. But now I think they are also having some international pressure. They are having branches of international groups going there. setting up their infrastructure and basically investing money, investing knowledge and everything. So I would say it's quickly getting better also. Another example in Portugal has banned the use of wild animals in circuses, blah blah blah. But yeah, this is just a tiny example. There are many other countries in the world that have decided it's not okay to put an animal in a tiny cage and use all kinds of tools and methods just to make them do funny tricks. Like, I think those animals are also just a tiny number of all the animals that are used, and they are not killed at all, as far as I know. Probably only when they get some injury and they cannot be used in circus. But the fact that we are stopping the animal use in circus is also symbolical, that we are understanding that this is not okay to do. Another quite surprising and funny example: Italian town enacts law requiring silent fireworks to alleviate pet stress and anxiety. I guess you have heard that in many places, like when the fireworks go on, a lot of people lose their dogs and all kinds of problems can start. But I guess there are some other solutions, and probably we shouldn't do firework stuff anyway, because it has all kinds of other pollution, not just the noise, but also what remains of that, and of course it's influencing also birds. So it's complex, but there are ways how to make it better. The Ocean Cleanup Project hopes to remove 50% of the plastic in the Great Pacific Garbage Patch in 5 years. So there are all kinds of ideas how to, like using huge nets or some kind of things that similar to what are used to collect some oil spills in the water, which is also a different and crazy disaster. But there are some solutions, and people are working on it, and probably they will get also good support, not just from society and individual supporters, donators, but also from countries. This is another funny one. Rats are protecting elephants on their migration routes across southern Africa, sniffing out landmines that they are too small to trigger. So basically, there has been war, and people have found out how to train rats to maybe leave some kind of trail on the landmines or something. I'm not sure how rat-friendly is that program, that project. But the idea is quite inspiring, I think. A report by the US Department of Agriculture says that honeybee populations are on the rise. I'm not saying anything about USA, I don't know, but let's go into this. But because in the past, I would say 10 years, we have been talking so much about the bees that I think it's crazy that we wouldn't do anything about it. And in some sense, I'm putting my hopes on those scientists, researchers that really know all the hard data or all the facts. And there are not so many ways to support them, but yeah, one of them is about talking about it. I guess I'm not doing the best job by telling it in such a sloppy way without really knowing the details about this, but I think that's one of the ways how to support them and showing that, yeah, something is probably getting better. Lab-grown meat could be in restaurants by 2021, cutting down land and water required to produce real meat by more than 90%. That's also a super controversial issue, and many people have the so-called yak factor about the so-called lab meat, but some say that probably that's the only way how we can reduce the huge impact of growing animals for meat and dairy products. So I don't know, we'll see how it will develop. Norway is said to become the 14th European country to ban fur farming industries. That is also, I think, happening super recently. In the past 20 years alone, most of these countries have made these decisions. Like, it's not okay to keep animals in tiny cages to take their fur off for just garments. It's not that our life or well-being depends on that. It's just for some luxury. Herds of more than 200 goats are being hired by the Portuguese government to prevent catastrophic wildfires. Hopefully they're also not harmed in any way, but yeah. probably we can also do something similar with the sheep and bees by creating the environment which is much more friendly for their own natural development. So that was the last one. Study shows that global tree growth over the 35 years has more than offset tree losses. Yeah, that's just the last example. The other ones were also related to human rights and other topics. You can find them on board Panda. Good news. And yeah, just keep your eyes open, look at the news. Now and then something happens. It doesn't necessarily mean that everything is happening for the good, but yeah, there are big organizations saying that we need to change. There is a lot of information about like the plant diversity that we could use instead of eating animals. Therefore, also helping to reduce suffering in the world and also all the environmental effects. This picture I included because we had a conversation about it. Like, is it in some sense representing like human, dominion over animals, or maybe not? Maybe it's just a play of symbols. But I think for children, it's a good way to think about animals and try to recognize them and notice them. And yeah, this image is quite likely inspired by this, like half a millennia ago created image. And yeah, I wish I had a little bit more information and understanding about the marine life, about what's happening in the seas, about overfishing and so on. But yeah, maybe for the next time. So what else we can do? Organize events like this, something similar, invite people. Most likely you have a lot of experts around you or all kinds of activists who would gladly do something like this or even much more interesting. And there are all kinds of films to watch together and so on. You can volunteer in many of the NGOs initiatives helping them. And of course you can donate if you don't have the time, if you have your special career in something, maybe you can donate, 5% of your income to some kind of charities that really speak to your heart, that are doing the work that you would like to do if you had more time. What else you can do? This is a shameless self-promotion. This is my TED Talk. You can find it just by Googling my name. You can still find it on the Facebook event. You can also support my work. I decided recently, actually just in the beginning of this month, I decided that I don't want to work in office anymore. I want to become a full-time activist. And I'm gonna risk trying to gather support from friends, from relatives, from people that say that what I do is worth it, and like little by little gathering like monthly income that would cover all the basic costs, so I can spend as much time as possible for all the lectures and radio shows and all kinds of other materials. So yeah, support me. And thank you for being here. Thank you for thinking about it. I'm pretty sure that if you're here, that you're interested in this also outside and any other circumstances and times. So I think this is super, super important, all these issues. And we need to bring more awareness about them, more attention to them. And, otherwise, I don't know. I'm a bit afraid that we will feel like after several decades that, well, what did we do enough in this time to do something for the good? I don't know, but it keeps me going, and it also gives me some kind of huge satisfaction that I'm doing something meaningful, and it's not just about consuming stuff, not just about enjoying, but also like I think it was Alice Walker who had this quote that activism or being active outside your obligations is the rent that I feel like I need to pay for living on this planet. If we are here, maybe we need to do something. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.